Greetings, neighbors. This is Reflections, a show sponsored by the Paducah Cooperative Ministry, where we address all sorts of community issues from the religious perspective. We're again sponsored by the Paducah Cooperative Ministry, where they, together with all the rest of the community, do God's work with human hands. My name is Gregory Waldrop, and I'm the pastor at Fountain Avenue United Methodist Church. And my co-host with me is counselor in private practice, Nikki Dickerson.
Very good.
Welcome, Nikki.
Thanks. Glad to be here.
Glad you're here with us.
And today we want to welcome Whitney Cassidy Kaywood, Dr. Whitney Cassidy Kaywood. And she is a licensed clinical social worker and also teaches adjunct with Murray State. Welcome.
Hello, nice to be here.
Very glad you're here. You know sort of the premise of this series of shows. We're sort of trying to catalog the psychological services that are available throughout the community. Particularly, we're interested in that from a religious perspective, and to share with us any and all the ways that religion and your practice sort of work together. And we're glad you're here. Thank you very much for being here. Is there can you talk in general ways about the way faith connects with in your practice?
Well, I would say that faith gives me the drive for having a practice. I feel like that's a big part of my life, and really what brings me to be practicing in the job that I am. I feel like it's sort of a calling that I have. As far as how it specifically impacts my practice, I would say my faith comes into play on a personal level. At times when I pray silently, of course, to myself during sessions, sometimes where I feel like I'm not sure where to go with someone or what to say next. I do pray for my clients. As far as I don't necessarily pray with my clients during session. I don't really advertise myself as a Christian counselor per se, mainly because I have a lot of people from very different backgrounds, and just feel like I try to stay open-minded and present myself as open to various belief systems. But my personal faith certainly impacts how I practice, and that's some of the ways, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Whitney, how do you use the client's faith when they come to you and say, do you start out with an assessment to kind of understand where they're coming from? And once you find that, is there a way that you use that?
Yes, that's part of my general assessment. I ask a variety of questions, like most counselors, assessing everything from their work status to their drug and alcohol use, including their spiritual beliefs also. The questions on my assessment would be things like, how important are spiritual issues in your life, and do you identify with a certain faith group or denomination? Do you attend services regularly? And when I do the initial assessment, I'll talk with the people about whatever answer they gave for that. And then throughout the time that I'm meeting with them, depending on what their answers are, I will try to incorporate that into whatever we're working on. So, for example, if I have somebody who very strongly indicates that faith is a big part of their life and they have very strong beliefs, it'll often come up that they may have some issue that I feel may be related to their faith. For example, someone who says they have a strong belief in God, and they believe that we're created in God's image, yet they're maybe struggling with a lot of self-hatred or self-loathing, or that comes up a lot, and I will bring that up to people and say, does that really fit with your belief system, how you're thinking about yourself? You're treating other people with kindness and respect, but maybe you're having trouble treating yourself that way, and how does that really fit with your belief system?
Does faith? Have you found faith to be a good way to understand people? Is that a
I think so.
Interesting avenue. I mean, is it helpful? It is helpful to you.
Oh yes. I mean, I think that it definitely is a big dimension in a lot of people's lives, and generally, I found people who maybe don't say they identify with a specific denomination or a specific religious group or thought, that they still have spiritual concerns and spiritual issues, and that's the reason I said I try to stay back a little bit as far as specific pinning myself down or other people. But definitely, I think that's a big part of most people's lives is some thought about why are we here and how do we fit in this world and what is our relation to one another. And to me, those are all issues of faith.
How has your faith impacted the type of degree or the type of area that you've chosen to focus on? Because for a lot of us, we hear the word counselor and we assume that they're all alike or they all have the same credentials. I happen to have a master's degree in counseling, but your master's degree is in social work and your PhD is in social work. So is there a reason that you chose one versus the other?
Well, I think it's one of those things that I'm not sure that I really premeditated on that, but as I've gotten into that, I really think that it is a matter of faith for me. Social work is, my background. As you said, counselors do come from all different backgrounds. Lots are psychologists, there are people with counseling degrees. I happen to be a clinical social worker. And as you mentioned, I teach social work classes, and what I always tell my students is that the unique thing about social work as a social science is that we focus on having action. It's not just focused on studying theory and specific techniques, but it's focused on really action towards social justice issues, which to me is a big part of my faith. That I feel like my exposure to religious thought and my teaching and what I've studied seems to indicate that social justice and dealing with issues related to oppression is very important to my faith. And that is very much tied in with my profession and my professional background. So it's one of those things that I guess I always thought I was interested in people. I'm very extroverted and I really like being around people, and I always kind of thought I wanted to be a counselor of some sort. And I just sort of got interested in social work, but the more that I study it, I feel like it really kind of has all come together in a way that maybe I didn't exactly understand when it started.
The social work kind of background makes me intrigued by the whole idea about the systems that we humans are a part of, social systems of all sorts. Faith being one of those kind of systems we operate out of. What are the other kind of systems you take a look at or you observe?
Sure. The family system, of course, the family of origin, where the background the person came from, but also their current family system, those kinds of things. How they relate basically in more general social situations is always a big thing that I look at. What kind of friendships do they have, other social ties, because that's really an issue that I see a lot, is people who feel very alone. And that's really sad to me because, we have a pretty big community, and there are many people who I think their major crisis is that they feel completely unconnected. And that can be a faith issue, and so that's one of the things that I try to work with people on is trying to figure out how to connect in with other people, whether that's through a faith community or through social outings or through taking up a hobby where you might be around other people, but just trying to find ways to help them network. So those kinds of would be the other systems that I primarily would look at.
Well, looking at systems, is there a specific way that you deal with there's a lot of buzzwords these days on commercials: depression, bipolar, anxiety, all the big issues that seem to be marketed by pharmaceutical companies. Is there a way that you specifically approach? You've talked about looking at systems and faith, but is there a way you specifically approach the way that you do therapy?
Well, in a general way, the general assessment, I would really look at are there any medical issues? That's always one of the first questions to ask is, are there any underlying medical issues that need to be addressed? Because sometimes people are having really serious psychological issues, and it may be because there is some kind of medical issue. So I would always assess, are they getting medical treatment? Have they at least had a physical, or are there other things that might need to be looked at? Are they on medication? If their symptoms are severe enough, I would encourage them to seek a doctor's appointment, perhaps get some medication if it seems appropriate. That's always usually a kind of a first step. And then from there, I just really try to figure out exactly what their specific issue is and work with them on trying to formulate an approach to get to wherever they would like to be, to try to help them try to visualize where it is they'd like to be. Where do they want to go? Do they want to be free of anxiety? Do they want to be free of depression? Do they want to be free of loneliness? Every person is completely different. So I really do try to specifically tailor each treatment plan to what that specific person needs. And so the techniques I use may be vastly different from one person to the next.
But no particular, there's a variety of kind of techniques or philosophies that you operate out of at any given time.
Well, sure. There are certain ones that I tend to kind of draw on more than others. I use a lot of cognitive behavioral therapy, which is basically the way that I use it is to help people identify when they're having distorted thought patterns, negative automatic thoughts. And a lot of people carry these around. And so the process with cognitive behavioral therapy is saying, if you're carrying a lot of negative thoughts, very catastrophic thinking, things are always bad and they're always going to be bad, that really has an impact on your mood and can very much exacerbate depressive symptoms, for example. So I draw on a lot of techniques to deal with that, where I would have them identify distorted thoughts, give them handouts and worksheets, keeping track of those things, and then trying to replace that with a healthier thought. Today was a bad day, but tomorrow is likely to be better. Or just because that person is angry with me doesn't mean I have no friends and no one cares about me, and kind of going on from there. So that's one technique I use a lot. And then I use a lot of what's referred to as dialectical behavior therapy. And it's kind of similar to cognitive behavioral therapy. It's almost kind of like a subtype of that. It's slightly different, but it focuses on teaching skill sets where if a person is really having difficulty with interpersonal relationships, they're just maybe awkward in interacting with other people, they may be too passive or they may be too aggressive. That strategy helps them find appropriate ways to interact with other people, and it has other things as well. But teaching skills, that's another thing that I do as a general technique.
It's you're very accomplished and great credentials. However, are there things that you hand off, that you refer out? Are there, if something presents itself, what are the things you want to give somebody else a chance, or you don't feel qualified?
Okay. Well, I do deal only with adults or older teenagers. The youngest client I usually would work with maybe 17, 16 possibly, but I just don't, that's not my area of expertise or interest, and I just feel like I'm not equipped to deal with children or a lot of adolescent issues. I also don't really do any kind of domestic violence counseling. If there's been any kind of physical violence, I would not take on a perpetrator. I might take on a person who's been victimized as a client, but I would not do counseling with perpetrators of domestic violence. I don't do a lot of substance abuse. I do occasionally have someone who has that as an issue, but if substance abuse or dependence is their primary issue, I would refer that out. Those are the main things that I tend to want to hand off to someone who specializes more in that area.
And with regard to medications, I'm guessing you are not able to prescribe medications, but what's your general philosophy for that, and how do you take care of those situations that you do think deserve, that there is a body chemistry issue going on with folks?
Well, in those situations, I'm just very, when I think it is really essential as a tool, I talk to people about, medication can be a tool to help you start to feel better, because there are people who are very averse to the idea of taking medication, and in some cases they can get better without that. In other cases, they really need it to get past whatever hurdle where they are, and there are people who really need to be on medication for extended periods of time. And I just, I don't give medical advice, and I explain to people that I can't, give a lot of commentary on types of medication or what would be appropriate, but I try to really work collaboratively with their physician, with their psychiatrist. I work a lot with psychiatrists in town and try to help either refer people if necessary or take referrals if needed, or I've also worked with general practitioners where I've had referrals, giving referrals back and forth, or communicating after we have a client in common to send progress notes or something that says this is what we're working on, or if somebody has an issue, a crisis come up, to also communicate with the primary care provider at that time. So I really just take an ancillary role when it comes to medication. I try to be supportive and encouraging and just collaborate with the provider in any way that I can.
We've been talking all about how you do practice. Can you tell us a little bit about some of the more logistical things, like where your office is located, fees, insurances, the kind of the nuts and bolts of practice?
Sure. My office is located off of Broadway on Nam Street, or Nam. People say it different ways, but it's right beside Kyler Park. There's a little strip center there, and my office is there, and I share an office suite with 3 other counselors. We're all in private practice, but we share the space. We have a common waiting area, and so that's where I am. And I do take most major insurance companies. I take Blue Cross Blue Shield, Aetna, Anthem, Cigna, the major insurance I do take. And I find that most people do use insurance to pay for their services. If they don't, I have a fee schedule that's pretty typical of what most people in the area charge. My hours tend to be Mondays and Wednesdays pretty much most of the day, and then I usually work Tuesday afternoon because I do teach 2 classes for Murray State also, so I have to fit that in, and then I have 2 children, so it's a lot of schedule juggling, but that's kind of I try to be somewhat flexible with my hours depending on when people need to be seen, but that's kind of the general overview. So
very good.
Is there anything interesting about this particular area in terms of the way people present themselves psychologically that you've noted from studying in different places, or are we just a part of the great big mainstream of?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I think one thing that I really like about being from Kentucky, and I think is probably common to people around here, is in general, people in this area tend to be pretty open and pretty friendly, and not, I mean, there are people whose basic personality is to be more guarded, and but in general, it's really a joy, the work that I do, because people are really fun to be around. I rarely have a client that I have difficulty engaging in conversation, and I think part of that is the culture that we tend to be more, kind of warm and friendly kind of people. As far as specific problems, I don't know that it's probably any different from anywhere else. I think, as with anywhere also, there is stigma attached to having mental health problems, and there are people who are resistant to seeking counseling, or maybe don't have any faith that it's possible to help anything because of stigma attached to, well, you just need to get over it, or, it's all about
having
willpower, and if you just have more faith, or you just, whatever, everything will be okay. And I think unless you've lived the experience of being depressed or having an anxiety disorder, or heaven forbid psychotic, that you really cannot understand what that feels like. And so that's an unfortunate thing, but I think that's probably common to most places, is that stigma attached with seeking services, even if you need it.
My own sense in the work that I do and the life that I live is at the heart of what's going on is trust. At the heart of sort of effective anything is this basic level of trust, and the more complete, the more advanced, the more trusting life can become, and that's a sort of an earned area, and that the more full and complete. I say all the time to a lot of folks that this trust is really the main thing we're working on. I don't know where you sort of where that fits into what you're thinking of. I know this whole notion about being connected obviously has to do with trust, and this whole idea about being more open and sharing and that sort of thing has to do with that. But I do sense a crisis of trust in general community and institutions, and in family patterns and habits and relationships. And anyway, I just wondered what you thought about it.
That's interesting. I hadn't really thought about that, but I'd say there's probably something to that. I think a lot about hope being an issue with people who I see, that they lose hope, that they lose the sense of there being something better, or that things can get better, or that anyone cares. And that probably is related to trust, the idea that, can you trust other people? Can you trust your world? Can you trust your community? Right. It probably is very much related to my thoughts about a sense of hope. And I see that as one of the things that I try to do in my work, is try to help restore a sense of hope with people, because a lot of people come to me who just are at the end of their rope, and really, not necessarily literally, but they just feel like life is terrible and it's really not going to get any better. And that's something that I try to do, is at least be one warm person in their life who cares and can be supportive and encouraging, and give them tools to work with to try to turn things around.
So do you, when you work with people, does your outlook kind of reflect that depression can improve more times than not, or that can actually be cured, so to speak? That's not really a great word, but or anxiety can not be a part of their life at some point. Obviously, case by case, that's going to vary. But
Right.
as a general rule, do you feel like you can instill in them that there's a ending point, or that there's a...
Sure, I try to. I think I'm an optimist by nature, and I don't think I could do the work that I do if I didn't believe that there could be something better. And sometimes I believe hope against hope. People get in really bad condition, and for whatever reason, sometimes it's medical, continue to deteriorate, and I sometimes continue to be the voice that says, I just, I really believe at some point something will break here, and it will something will give, and things could be better. And when people come in to meet with me, I tell everyone as a disclaimer, I make no promises that I'm going to make you better. I do not have, some sort of major ego thing where I think that I can cure people or save people or anything like that. I just tell people I see myself as someone to walk along with you, to be supportive and encouraging, to try to give you skills and tools that you can use. And it's unfortunately, in some cases, the person may not have the will to take it, but I can still offer it even when they're down. And I've had people say, "Are you going to give up on me because I'm not feeling better?" I'm like, "No, I'm not going to ever give up on you. I'm just still going to keep trying to be your cheerleader, and maybe it'll take. I hope it'll take."
I think one of the things I've realized, I guess, where that question's coming from for me is a lot like you're saying, the clients may come in such a bad place, and then society seems to, I don't know, I guess I've picked up maybe a stereotype that it's about maintaining something. If you come in and you're depressed, well, you can keep it from getting worse if you take medication, or if you do this, or if you do that.
Right.
And sometimes maintaining is the best and most appropriate thing to do. But I guess I never approach anybody with the idea of, let's just see how much we can maintain.
Right.
I
Let's just
tend to be more of an optimist like
Right,
you, and think,
right.
let's see what we can do.
let's see how good it could be, how
Yeah.
much growth we can achieve, how
Right.
how much goodness we can move toward, rather than let's just. But yes, you have to be realistic, and there are cases where it's clear that there's always going to be some sort of issue, but trying to manage it in a way that is the least intrusive in their life is the
Right.
strategy.
Are there any practices, habits at the church, any regular routines that you find to be therapeutic, beneficial, or you observe or note that are particularly helpful or a part of people's lives who are balanced and healthy?
Well,
Or healing, either one?
I think regular prayer seems to help people, regardless of whatever their orientation is religiously, whatever denomination or whatever, that seems to be helpful to people. I often encourage people to also seek counsel with their religious leaders, even if they are seeing me, not to say go away and just see them, but to kind of supplement with that, because I feel like if their belief system is not lining up with how they're thinking, their thought processes, this kind of cognitive behavioral stuff I was talking about, that may be one more place to have that reinforced, that let's try to line that back up. So meeting with spiritual leaders, I think, can be important. And really, just regular fellowship with other people. And faith communities are a very important place that we find that, especially in this community, because faith communities are so really kind of one of our dominant social settings. I'd say that might be as therapeutic as anything, is having time to fellowship with other people and be around other people and have those social connections, people who call you and check on you and who care how you're doing.
Right. I have some senses that notion of regular, whether it's worship or fellowship or prayer, is at issue. The random way the world sort of works, where it's just sort of here and there and hit and miss, and works against us in terms of meaning and purpose and a sense of life and vitality. And I think that notion of regularity is a pretty urgent thing.
Kind of keeping us grounded or having some sort of touchstone to
something you don't have to get up in the morning and figure out.
Right.
Something that's going to happen and you count on. It's going to be there, and it's going to happen in all sorts of ways. One of my first professors talking about this one time, and this will tell you how long ago I was trained, but he said the first thing I advise is to go out and chop and split a cord of firewood. And he said, so there's not many people splitting firewood as much anymore. There still are some, but anyway, he thought this whole regular and physical activity was a big part of it.
And there's something to that. I mean, regular exercise is one of the things I recommend for a lot of people. And yes, having some routine, because a lot of people's lives are very chaotic and just not a lot of structure.
Right.
And some people don't respond to a lot of structure, and that's not something that makes them feel better. But for a lot of people, adding that in would probably be helpful.
Yeah. We've gone through our 30 minutes. It's been a good gift to have you here. We're pleased for all you've reported and have you in the community and doing the work of healing that you're a part of. Glad to be with you again, Nikki.
Yes, sir.
And we're glad to have been with you all again on Reflections, where we with Paducah Cooperative Ministry do God's work with human hands. We will see you the next time. Shalom.
In mission